that worked, but okay. I'm gonna wait a little bit for people to come. It's not everybody yet.
I think you're supposed to hit start recording.
I had started streaming.
And start recording? Because like they post to YouTube.
Oh, really? Okay, thank you. This, all right. You are Jacob? Are you the Will? I'm the Will. You're the Will? Yes, sir. Wait, that's not what your name was. Now I'm confused. You go by Bill? Billy. Are you Jason? I'm Reggie. Reggie. Okay. Cool. Duncan. What is your name? We probably met before.
Just a little sacrifice.
You play tested, yeah. I remember. House.
Oh, my name is Brian.
How are you feeling today? How are you feeling today?
Bad.
Okay.
Hi, that was my name, right? Yeah. You're welcome.
Does everybody have a web browser and a text editor? I'm going to be using Notepad and VS Code. If you feel like there's something to say, sometimes I summarize it if I'm like want to know what their team is about, what they're doing. But we can highlight if you're already summarizing it by going through it and you want to document the work that you're doing, you can. You don't need to feel like you're doing but if you hello. Are you here for the workshop? Hello, I am Brian.
You're so robotic.
What is your name? Michael. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Brian.
Hello. This chair doesn't move up and it makes me feel very short.
You got switch chair.
You don't have to do that. It's fine. You want?
Sure.
I just want to be able to see people's faces. It's not because I feel inadequate. Thank you. Okay. You guys want me to post these slides right now? You don't really need it. I will share on the second. Wait,
I tried to do all of returns except for I didn't ever bother to beat the boss because it was just not a boss fight. I know where this story is going from now. I'm satisfied. I don't need to spend an hour grinding as well as I do.
It's your birthday?
Yeah, the stories.
Oh my
It is a remarkably good combat system for what it is, but you're not there for the combat.
I'm now 19.
Okay.
I mean, it's a remarkably combat system.
I posted the slides in programming if you want to look at them while I'm doing this. Hopefully you can't actually edit them, although if you could, I wouldn't really care as long as you don't mess it up.
Do you want
Okay.
small change in euros? Actually, sure.
Yeah. All right. We should get started.
I need this.
Wait, don't you need more?
Cool.
I'm a poor girl.
Okay, welcome to the Intro to JavaScript workshop. Is everyone excited?
Brian.
Okay, we're gonna start with doing a hello world
Yeah.
for HTML. So just open any basic text editor, like Notepad works. I like doing Notepad because it shows people how you don't need anything but really basic tools, and you can technically make a website. So just open a text editor and type hello world, and then when you save it, desktop, call it hello world.html, and it's important that you put the .html there. Hello, are you here for the JavaScript workshop? Hello, I am Brian. What's your name?
Kushal.
Krisha?
No, Kushal.
Kushal.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm saying it right.
No, Kushal.
Kushal. Okay, cool. Do you have a laptop?
Yeah, well,
Awesome. Okay. I don't know where that went. So. Okay. So. Wait. Right now I'm just having everybody open up a text document and type hello world and save it as hello world.html. And then once you've done that, you can see if you find the file, you can double click and it should open in your web browser automatically. And you have a web page. Yay, you're a web developer. Not really though. Technically what this is not valid HTML. You can inspect element. If you right click and click inspect or inspect element depending on your web browser, you should be able to pull up what the HTML file actually looks like. And you'll see that it adds all these things called tags. HTML tag, head tag, body.
Yeah.
And important thing to note is that the hello world text you actually wrote is inside of this body tag, which is inside of this whole thing, which is called the document. It's important to know how to inspect elements so that you can at least access the console. So once you get here, you can actually start typing JavaScript in here. Why is the backspace key like that? And you could actually write JavaScript commands, and you could do stuff like, oh, I have access to the document, which it's even highlighting for me because it's crazy. Dot body, and that's the body. You can see the border around it. But now, so, yeah. So this is just HTML in here, and it's technically not valid HTML, but your browser is smart enough to try to fix it for you, which is the first lesson in web development / JavaScript development, which is that it will try to do a lot of things for you to fix problems that you do, which makes it really hard if you make problems appear and it doesn't tell you about them. Because sometimes you'll have errors that other compilers would tell you are errors, but this will just try to fix for you, so you have to sort of do error checking yourself sometimes. So the next step is, how do I start writing a JavaScript? Because I don't really want to focus too much on HTML. I want to talk more about JavaScript. And to do that, you're going to have to use a script tag. So these tag things that I mentioned briefly are just have angle brackets on either side. They have an opening and a close that is denoted by this slash at the ending of it. And everything inside of a script tag is going to be compiled as JavaScript. So you can start by just doing like an alert message, say hi, and if you save this and then go back here, you can refresh. And you can see that it's now giving me this alert message. You're also going to want to know how to do console.log. And what that will do is it'll output it into this console window, which is important to know how to open this because otherwise when you just do this regularly, all of your console logging isn't visible. Yeah. Is everybody following? Okay. I'm going to delete this. So, yeah, the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about how to start doing JavaScript game programming. So specifically, I'm going to be doing canvas drawing, which is how I make pretty much all of my games. You can make games without canvas in JavaScript, and you can use HTML, but I want to focus on how to use a canvas. So canvas is a tag in and of itself, so you can do the same thing like this. You can save. And you'll notice that it pushed down my hello world, but there's not really anything here. What you want to know how to do is inspect element on this button here so that you can actually highlight it, and it'll show you this is the canvas itself, and you'll see that it's blank, so you can't actually see it. So to get it to actually show up, I'm going to put a border on it, which I'm just going to give you like really quick crash course on how to do CSS, which you don't really need to know, but if you add a style tag to the beginning, this technically goes in the head. Again, it's doing magic for you. You can say everything that's considered a canvas tag will have this style attached to it, and you can do something like, say, give it a background of pink. And now you'll see it. You can also, what I like doing instead of giving it a background is give it a border. So you can say, 1 pixel solid black. Borders, you have to give it like 3 parameters, the size, the type, and then the color. And then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this hello world. You can also, if you want to put it in the middle, you can give it margin auto. I don't think that worked. Or not. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so the next thing you have to learn how to do is how to draw. Yes?
Can I make the font size larger?
Yeah, but I'm not really going to be working with strict text. If you want to learn CSS, you can look up CSS.
No, I mean
tutorials.
the
Oh, for this?
testing the
Yeah, yeah.
notepad.
How do I, does that not work? Zoom in. What?
Page setup, I think.
Where's that?
Files. Maybe not.
Usually it's just Control plus and minus. Okay, that's fine. What I'll do is I'll open it in VS Code and then, yeah. This is really hard for me to look at because I'm at such a weird angle. Hopefully this will work. There we go. Is that good, Wayne? Okay, what about this? Yeah. Awesome. Okay, now if we want to start drawing onto the canvas, we have to know how to get the canvas. So we're going to have to declare a variable in the script and grab it from the document. Whenever you're interacting between JavaScript and the HTML tags up here, we basically want this tag. You have to call it on the document, so get element by you can get elements by lots of different things. I usually use ID, so that I then just set the ID here. And then you plug it in here. Also, semicolons aren't required in JavaScript, but I like doing them because it makes it easier when you transition to other languages, and it's just looks better in my opinion. Yeah. And once you have this in here, you can actually test already whether that worked. So if you try to access canvas element in the console, you can see that right now it's giving me the actual canvas object, and it'll even like highlight it for me. So now if you want to start drawing onto it, you need what's something called the context. And you have to specify that it's 2D because that's the only option, and I guess they're trying to support other things later, but they don't actually work yet. And then the most basic canvas drawing function to learn, first of all, is you can just say fill rect, and this, you can see it even prompting me, you just give it x, y with height, so if I did something like 10, 20, 100, 200, it'll automatically draw a rectangle for me in those dimensions. Does anyone feel like I'm going too fast or too slow? Everyone's typing. Okay. I'll pick that as a slow down question mark. Does anyone want to know how to size this canvas to be whatever size they want?
Sure.
There are 2 different ways that you can do that. You can just specify it in here, 100, something like that. You can also specify it in here. Once you have access to the element, this element object is basically the exact same thing as this, so you can actually call width here the same way that you specified there. So I can just go ahead and make this terribly written code by setting it in 2 different ways at the same time. And now it's 100 by 100. I don't really like that size though. Yeah. Key. Now, once you know how to draw stuff, there's lots of different canvas drawing methods. You can look them up. If you want to change the color, that's an important one. you say fill style, and everything in JavaScript that I say to you is going to be in camel case. So the first letter is lowercase, and every new word is capitalized. There's different ways to specify color. You can actually just give it a string. That's the name of a color. You can also give it hex values. So if you start with a hashtag, you can give it 3 or 6. So this is going to be 3 zeros. Each of those numbers associated with our G and B. So if I gave this like more R than G and B, you'll see that it shows up as red. And typically you'll see hex values is actually 6, so it's usually 2 per, but I'm lazy and I just do 3. Plus it's easier to see that R, G, and B are separated like this. Also, if you don't know hex, it also goes up to A, B, C, D, E, F. F is actually the highest amount that you can have for red. It's kind of hard to tell there, but also it doesn't matter what case it's in. There's other ways too. You can do RGB as a string. It's pretty interesting the ways that you can specify color, and there's links that you can look up how to do that. But the next thing that I want to show is once you have something drawing, you're going to want, if you're trying to make a game, you want to be able to do this in a loop. So you want basically a drawing loop so that it updates the screen for the data that you're trying to draw. So the first thing that we have to do to get that to work is just to create a draw function where we just basically put this inside of the draw function instead of over here so that we can control when it draws what it needs to draw. I guess this should be in here too. And I'm going to go ahead and start creating some variables also so that we can specify where on the screen we want it to draw this. So that if the position is controlled by variables, we can start messing around with it and have it move around. So if I run this again, you'll see that it doesn't actually draw anything anymore because I'm not calling this function. So we can draw it here. And now if we want this to loop, obviously, like if anybody's familiar with looping in general, you could like do while loops and for loops, but that doesn't, you'd have to give it a way of sleeping or something like that so it doesn't just clog up your entire processing cycle. The way that web browsers you should use to create draw loops is they have a function on the window called request animation frame. And what that does is it says the function that I'm passing to you called draw, call this function the next time you update your screen renderer. So every time it updates the screen of the web page, it'll call this draw function, which will then redraw this object. And if I do that right now, you won't be able to tell that anything's happening because every frame is going to be drawing the same thing. So since I was able to put the position as a variable, I can just increase 1 to x every frame. And now you'll see that it can move. You'll also see that it's stretching and not actually moving because we're not clearing the context. It's drawing basically on top of itself a million times. So you have to learn how to clear the canvas, which is, I think you can only use clear rect. There's no other option. Again, it's xy width height because it's a rect, so I'm just going to give it 0, 0 at the top left corner, and then canvas element.width and canvas element.height for the bounds. So now you'll see that it actually legitimately moves across the screen. And now that we're at this point, you can start doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Like you can say y plus equals math.cosine of x and see what that does. And then you'll see it bouncing up and down. You'll be like, I can't tell that that's bouncing at all, so I'll multiply that by 20. Or that's bouncing way too fast, so now I need to give it a frequency. And let's do it based on pi and say every 20 units it'll go around half of a circle. Now you learn simple harmonic motion. One thing I really like to do when I have update loops also is to have a frame counter. Not for like frames per second, but for just how many frames we're in, and it lets me do a lot of really cheaty shit, stuff. Because then you can do stuff like say x is equal to the frame count mod canvas element dot width, and then it'll actually just loop around, except that it won't because I failed somehow. Oh, because I'm adding instead of setting equal to. So then once it gets to the end, it'll just teleport. Boop. So yeah. But something to note with this is that when you're using request animation frame, it's dependent on the refresh rate of your browser, which is inconsistent. It's usually around 60 FPS, but you shouldn't really rely on that for a game update. So usually what I do is I separate the update loop for the logic versus drawing. So to do that, we would basically create an update function where that would be instead where we would handle stuff like the the changing of the values. So this is where I would add 1 to the x like we had before. All this stuff can stay here, and then I would move this here. And then to get this start running, we can create an interval, set interval, so that the reason why you use this function instead of request animation frame is that you have more control over the rate at which it's going. And I'm going to do it like this, equals 60. And you're going to do 1,000 divided by FPS because it's in milliseconds, so this is 1 second, and this is the number of frames. So this is the seconds interval of how often it will call this function. So if I set this up right, it should hopefully start going like that. And we're going really fast. Does anybody have any questions? Are you guys just working on house?
No, right now we're actually going live.
Okay, cool. So you guys got all this? You've got all of this working?
Oh, that I fell behind.
Huh?
That I fell behind, so I just started watching.
Oh, okay. Where did you fall behind?
Console gives me, or when I expect element, it gives me like I have a syntax error somewhere, so I had to find that.
Oh, okay. Do you still have the syntax error?
Yeah.
What is the error?
I think it's a token error. Or an expression token. So.
Is anybody else at this point? Or are people struggling? All right, I'm gonna look around.
Oh, I'm missing it. Oh, I'm missing a triangle
Yeah.
somewhere, I think.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Here. That was
You spelled function wrong. Oh, I do that all the
Oh
time.
my god.
I don't know why that's a common thing, but apparently it's easy to put the I before the T.
I'm using Eclipse, not Visual Studio.
Oh yeah, but it's
That's why
still
we
it's
thought-
color coding,
Yeah.
so that's why I could tell that function wasn't the right color.
Oh.
I got how to get this move, and then I got lost and started throwing like modules and stuff.
Oh yeah, okay,
It's just
sorry.
mod.
Yeah, so when you're in the draw function, you can add like x plus equals 1 or something. Are you trying to change it into an update function? Wait, let me.
You do it. But I don't even project.
Oh yeah, don't worry about that.
Oh,
Are
okay.
you using Firefox?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's HTML conventions that I'm ignoring because it's not necessary on most web browsers, but if you're actually gonna publish stuff, you should technically do it right. I actually ran into issues because they didn't do it properly, and then it like broke on somebody else's website. How's yours, Bill? Billy.
It's just not, where'd you call the update control part?
I called set interval. So, yeah, I'm going through everything really fast. This makes it go in a loop.
I'm like, you want me to speak like samples of JavaScript, you just like coding the script box and like JS, so like, front-end JavaScript stuff.
So you were able to get it to draw. And now you're trying to set up the update loop.
Wait, how are you using Visual Studio? Because it like creates a C++ project? Is that what you're doing?
I'm using Visual Studio Code, VS Code. You could just use Notepad. I was doing it from Notepad. It wasn't working.
You don't have a slash. You don't have a slash here.
No. Oh no. If you're just doing x plus 1, it doesn't bounce back. It's just x. I was cheating to make it look like it's bouncing back, using complicated mathematics. Which I forget that people don't know what it is. Oh, I'm not even using this computer.
I can imagine there being an object in the real world called, the air carrier Hubbard, but I can't imagine there being something called the Hubbard, air carrier. Does that make sense? Great.
So people have got this story. This is the drawing. And then you clear the screen so that it doesn't create over itself. That's what request animation frame does. Usually 60 FPS, but you can't rely on it. That's why I'm using a set interval. And that's the crazy stuff that you don't want to look at. Okay, this is the next thing. Raise your hand if you're comfortable with me continuing. Yeah. Michael? Oh, you're Michael. You're Reggie. So, trying to get the update loop? Okay. Alright, while you guys are catching up, I'm just going to mess around with this stuff. What happens if I add y to the x? Oh no, that's not what I want. What happens if I add x to the y? Oh, falls immediately. It makes sense. What if I divide that by 100? Ooh, gravity? that was like kind of close. Yeah, it's fake gravity. Ooh, what about this? That's gonna be terrible. It's just gonna disappear. Oh, but what about if I divide by y? Oh, that's interesting. It's gonna go in a line. Huh. Wait. What if I don't start them at the same value? What? Oh, it's crazy. Wait, does that actually work? Yeah, it just goes towards the corner. That's cool. Yeah. Math.cosine always makes things more interesting. I have no idea what this is going to do. That's super weird. Isn't math fun?
You say so.
What if I add y here, and then I subtract x from the y? I think this actually makes it go in a circle. Yeah. It's crazy. Huh? Look at that. That's crazy. There's no cosine or sine involved, and yet it's going in a circle. Yeah. Okay. How's everyone feeling? Good? Because the next step is, what if we want like 1,000,000 squares instead of just one square? How do we deal with that? If they all have their own data, like their own position, and we want to keep track of that, one way to do it is you could go in the draw function and create a loop and just tell it to draw like 1,000,000 squares. But then that data for each square is separate on the draw function than in the update, and we want to be able to transfer information between them. And we want to be able to save information between frames as opposed to just recreating them every time. So first thing that we're going to do is create a list. In JavaScript, you can create arrays or lists just by saying open close square brackets. You can technically also put things in here to initialize them, but we're not going to do that because we want to use objects. The way that you add to a list is with the command push. And what we're going to push into the list is a JSON object. And the way that you can define JavaScript objects is just by using these curly braces. It looks like a block of code, but what we'll put inside of it is the variable name. So I could say x0, oops. Or actually, yeah. So if I make this the same as the object we already have, I could say it has an x and y of 2020, its width is 100, and its height is 100. And this will create an object inside of this list. And then instead of just drawing x and y here, we can tell it to loop through this list and draw everything in it as a rectangle. So there's a really cheaty way that you can do that if you remember that we can just pass functions in JavaScript. You can just say entities.forEach, and then you say function e, basically declaring a function inside of this other function that we're calling and saying it takes the variable e. Actually, I'm just going to call this entity because that's what it is. And then we can say for each entity, fill the rect at its x. Technically, we're going to remove this. Let's see if we have any errors. Well, what the heck? I zoomed in so far, I can't even click on console anymore. And now, in update, we can do the same thing. Now we can say delete that x plus. Yeah, so now it does the same thing it was doing before, but the difference is it's now running from a list. And the benefit of that is that now we can add a million things to this list and it'll process all of them. So are people familiar with how to use for loops? Yes? Is there anyone that is not familiar with how to use a for loop? Okay, you guys are. And then to make them slightly different from each other, we're going to modify one of the position values by I by some amount. So we can add I times 10 to the x. So now it'll add 10 entities into this array. And now they'll all do this crazy thing. You'll even see that the way that they're rotating is dependent on their position, which is crazy. It almost looks like it's 3D. It doesn't look as good. How do I make it take up the whole freaking whatever? Sorry, okay. Yeah, this is how you declare it. This is how you add stuff to it. This is how you run code on it. Wait, can I see?
They don't move like that. They just all unison.
Okay, yeah. So if you want them to start moving in different ways, what you can do is add another variable to each object, something like speed, and set that equal to I. And then when you update them, you can instead add d.speed. So now they'll move at different speeds, and you can see it takes them a long time to separate because they're all too big and the same color. Yeah. What if we wanted this one to move too? See how its speed is 0? They all start like that. Actually, we could do it on the same location. Sorry. So you got nothing? What is it? You're not using. Oh, you are. Okay.
Bro, where's funny? When's the same thing that happened?
Let's go. Wait. Do you have any errors in the console? Character encoding? Okay. What happens when you run it? Okay. Where do you start the program? Set interval draw. Are you adding anything to the entities? Okay. If you're having issues. If you want to start debugging, now that you're working, oh, keep going to my laptop. If you're having trouble getting stuff to work, try debugging in your update function. One thing you can do, actually no, don't do that. You just do it here. Go into your console. If you have your entities public, you can actually access it and look at what's inside. This is super weird. So you can look at the objects in it and you can see what the values are. So if you're seeing what you should expect, then it should be fine. The only other things is that when you're running through them, maybe it's not doing what you think. And when you're trying to use Canvas, it's possible that it's like not drawing the right color or something like that. So for safety.
How'd you get that window in the web page? Check the entities.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So first inspect gets you this. And then you should be able to click on something called console somewhere, depending on your web browser. And that'll let you debug anything that's global. And what, are you using Safari? I'm using Chrome. So you inspect element? At the top, you should have this at the top. Yeah, okay, so you have something, you already in there.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering how you can copy it.
Oh, you have to type it in.
Oh.
Just type in the name of your list.
Oh.
The thing is that since you can just run JavaScript in this console right here off of a web page, you actually have access to all the global variables. So you could do stuff, like before when we were drawing based on X and Y, I could have had you come in here and change the X and Y in here and see that it updates. Were you able to get yours moved, Duncan?
No.
You still don't know why it's not drawing. One stable ground check is to see that this code is even getting run. So if you add a console log here, in the loop of the draw function, you should see it basically printing an object every frame, or actually all of your objects every frame. So you can get it to print. How to print the object itself. Oh no, put it inside of it, because maybe that's not right. Okay. So at this point, you have an object with 10, 10, 50, 50, and you should be drawing a rectangle. Are you setting the fill style anywhere? You can do it here. That doesn't actually. Once it runs once, it'll set it. Here, take out the console log so it doesn't break. Oh, yeah, okay. Yep, that would make a lot of sense. You were clearing the rect after drawing to it. Oh, whoa. What's going on over here? The way I did it was I did x plus y plus equals y over 10, and then y minus equals x over 10.
Wait, Brian, what do we use the garlic for to like something canvas size?
You can put it in here, or you can just say canvas element dot width.
Just like some very in style thing.
It can be in the tag. You can, actually no, don't put it in the style anymore. You put it in the tag, so just after ID, I can put a space and put width equals. And then don't put spaces between those. It doesn't actually matter. That's just like HTML conventions. Does it give you a line number? You can actually click on that. You have to use semicolons on comments. Or I equals 0, semicolon. Oh, and then the same thing. Ooh, nice, you got it working. You're back. Nice. Cool. We will get your guys' stuff up on the screen. These are pretty fun. How'd you get into this? Nice, okay. Cool. Yeah. It looks like we're all on the same page. And this is pretty exciting. Okay. Okay. So, alright. You guys want to learn classes? Or do you want to learn input? Classes? You can do classes. So this works well for just processing a list, but it doesn't really work well if you want your objects to do different things, because they're all doing the same thing. So one thing that we want to do is separate the update and even the draw from being in here and being more associated with the data of the object. Because you might want objects that have different draw functions and objects that have different update functions. One way that you could do that is you could actually just put it in here. You can actually just specify a function and say, you know, this dot x plus equals 1, or plus equals this dot speed. Don't say I because it'll break. And then instead of doing this, you just tell it to update itself. And it should still do the same thing. And then you can do the same thing with draw. But this this style of organizing the object can get a little messy if you're ever trying to do object-oriented like inheritance and stuff like that. You can't really inherit from this aside from just copying the code. So if you want to make use of object-oriented stuff, like all the tools that come with that, you can actually use the class keyword to create a class. Something like entity, constructor. I didn't actually set this up properly, so let me do that. And then this has to do this. Before I get into this class, let's make sure that this isn't broken, which it totally is because of that. Yeah, okay. So at this point, you can move your update function and draw function into the object and call it from here. And it should still work exactly the same as long as you change entity into this. This will obviously refer to the function or the object itself. So when you call this, you can access anything that's in here. But you don't have to do this step if you don't want to. If you just want to jump right into classes, we're basically going to do the same thing where it's still you're going to be calling draw and update on the entity, but we're going to structure the functionality inside of a class structure instead. So we basically just want to give it an x and y. You can also put width and height in here, but you can also specify that explicitly. So you can set it up so that the way the constructor works, if you're not familiar with object-oriented, is when you create one of these entities, you're saying what information do you need to give it to create it. And I'm saying that an entity can have a position, x and y, and then I'll store that position under the object itself. And then I'm also going to store I'm also going to store the width and height, although I'm not allowing you to specify those because I'm just going to keep it the same. And then this is the same. I think, wait, actually I forgot to do this. I think you just go with this. And then copy this, put it in here. So you can see how these two things sort of do the same thing. But we're going to actually move this below it because I need the class to exist before I try to use it. And I'm going to replace this with a call to a new entity. So this is the beginning of the object, and I'm not going to create an object anymore. I'm just going to new entity, and then the x is going to be like 10 times I, and the y is going to be 10. We can also give it a speed if we want to keep that consistent. And then, oh yeah, that wouldn't have worked if I didn't do that anyways. The I. Yeah, that should work. I'm showing you a really bad example because mine are just working immediately. So when you're trying to change into this, you're probably going to run into some bugs. But what this means is that you can then extend from this class function and then just change the update function, and you don't have to rewrite any of this other stuff. Or you could, oh yeah, we should do this too. I'm also going to specify a color. And then get rid of this. So you can see now this makes our draw and update functions way more simplified. All the draw function does is it clears the rect, draws all of the entities, and then requests another frame, and update just updates each entity. And then the updates are stored in the entity itself. I'm going to go ahead and start doing some crazy stuff also. You can also do this. What if you wanted the, this rotates around the origin. What if you wanted it to rotate around every point?
There's no decision
I'm distracting you all. How far is everybody? Do you feel comfortable with the classes? No?
My errors are rising by the millisecond.
Okay.
You need to find speed.
Yeah, I had that same thing.
You need to add speed to Constructor.
Yeah, I was doing things out of order. If you're just trying to like copy along, you're probably missing some things because I'm not going at a very good pace. Ooh, actually, I don't know which one I'm supposed to give it. This is not going to work. I don't know what this is going to do.
Wait, why are you writing this before? Oh, wait, are you writing? No, he's writing
What was the question?
8 hours error was. You start writing the methods inside of the code.
Oh, like update and draw?
Yeah.
Oh, in here. Oh, okay. I am passing it the speed as I here also. Reggie, are you passing the speed as I?
Is that I?
Yeah.
Is that a new for it?
No, this is, I moved it.
Oh, you moved. Oh.
It's below the class definition so that the class exists when I try to use it. If we want, we can structure everything that's related to the start together. I'm gonna delete X and Y up here because they're not used anymore. Interesting.
What?
That's not right. Sorry, I'm just like going crazy. Whoa! Anyway. How's everybody? How's you guys kind of figured out? Can you see the picture?
Now you're back to where we were. Okay. And now you can start doing this stuff.
Do I stop? Oh, you're trying to. Oh, that's because you're dividing by 0 sometimes. Oh, that's why I added the +10 before that. I think that's why. Was it working before you did that?
That's why you do it.
Always drop. So this.
So you see that drop update function over there on the screen?
You're gonna.
Yeah, that's where those go.
Okay, go down to your rotate.
This is how it comes.
You don't have any console errors? You don't have any errors in the console?
Just do this for like a day or two.
Okay, what happens if we just add to the next one? Oh, you have equals, not plus equals. Okay, so that's not like a structural issue. That's cool. Are you using cosine?
Yeah. I just leave each one in the index.
Yeah.
I know. I just made a for loop.
Where's the update?
Like operate. Can we just do this in like?
Oh yeah, sine of t. To programming, you can actually edit JavaScript in Google Docs and then plug in Editing. I tried it. It's actually really interesting. But if you have to do some setup to get it to work properly if you're using loops, because otherwise it breaks. I can show you how to do that later though if you're just doing it. If you try to do it right now, it's not gonna work. You have to set it up right.
I know laser pointers ain't good for people's eyes.
0 to 255 if you're using the string.
No, hacking is not the way to do it.
Is yours working?
No, now I'm just going in.
Okay, that's weird. So then the update function just defines how they move. Yeah, so they're just moving it. Yeah. That's cool.
That means change.
You could give them different speeds in the X and Y and then make them random. If you guys just want like an easy way to test differences between them, you can do like velocity X and then give it like a random. Math.random will give you a random value between 0 and 1. And then you can just add. Yeah, look at that. It's like a particle effect explosion. You'll also notice that once they go off screen, they're never coming back. You want to wrap them? Hello. Hello. Oops. So we can just say when the X gets past the width of the screen, set it to 0, and when the Y gets past the height of the screen, set it to 0. Oh, something to note, I'm sure you've all figured this out already, but 0, 0 is in the top left, and Y going positive is down. I didn't mention that, but it is important because programs like Unity will do it wrong, so just know that. Also, I'm only checking one direction because the velocities are positive, but if they go negative, they'll be gone forever. Yeah, these patterns are always more interesting when they repeat, so doing stuff like this is cool. That's why I was doing like circles, because then they would just keep going.
Okay.
So what kind of games are people interested in making? We could make a top-down shooter. If we wanted to make Entity our base class, we'd want to give it something that basically just sets up the initial structure that we can then extend from to do everything else. I think in house it's called Thing. That has basically how to rotate stuff. I don't know if you guys looked into that, but getting stuff to rotate is slightly more involved. You have to look more into how canvas drawing works. There's more stuff than fill rect. Basically, I'm going to go into this a little bit, but fill rect is actually kind of shorthand for 3 different functions. What it really does is it says begin path, then draw a path of a rectangle, and then fill it. So rect is a function all on its own. And then, oops. And then it fills. And the reason why I'm bringing up this is shorthand for this is because the way that context drawing works is based on this sort of notion of paths. You can basically start a path, draw some sort of path like a rectangle, and then tell it to either fill or to stroke. There are some other options. But there's other things other than rect, because in order to get into the other methods on a context, you have to know that everything happens inside of a path. And you can do stuff like move to, which on its own doesn't do anything other than just say your path is now at this point. And then you can do something like line to, which says draw a line, let's say plus width, which then goes like that. And if we fill that, it's not going to do anything because that doesn't have any structure to it to fill. It's just a line. You could stroke it. So if we do this, you probably won't see anything. Yeah. But if you say stroke, then you'll see lines being drawn. And they're really tiny, so you can start messing around with stuff like line width and make it like a lot. Oh, that's gonna look really weird. Or like line cap. Make it round at the edges, which is pretty crazy looking. Other shape other than a square or a circle, which to do circle is also. Let's see. If you wanted to do a circle, it's called arc. You have to give it x, y, and a radius, and for the radius, that's half the diameter, and the diameter of a square is basically its width. So I'm just going to turn the size of the square into a circle. And then you have to give it a start angle and an end angle. So it's just 0 and math.pi times 2 always. And you'll see little circles. And I'm stroking it instead of filling it. But you can see if you don't give it pi times 2, it'll just end the circle prematurely, make a little half circle, like little birds. You can do crazy stuff with that. But anyway, I'm going to put the rect back in here. You can also use this to both fill and stroke at the same time, which, by the way, I'm going to make this a little bigger. I don't know if you'll be able to notice this, but the order that you put stroke and fill actually matters. You can stroke first, you can fill first and then stroke, and you'll see the line width is actually kind of bigger because it's being drawn on top of the fill. But if you put the fill on after, it'll draw the line in the background and then put the fill on. So it basically cuts it in half because the width of the line is going both sides of the line. So if you fill on top, it'll cut it off. You guys want to learn how to make things rotate, or you want to learn how to use it user input?
Let's do input.
Okay. Cool. So you have to learn about window stuff. Actually, this isn't really window stuff, but I usually use window. Window, I mentioned before documents, mentioning the document. Window refers to like the entire web window, and you can add event listeners to it. You can also add event listeners to the canvas element. The difference is that one of them will only happen when you're focused on the element, such as like if you want to get a click event on the element, you can add something like a mouse down event listener onto the canvas element, but if you put it on the window, it'll happen even if you don't click on the element, which is just what you usually do. And the arguments for it is the name of the event that you're trying to look for, and then the function that you're going to call. So you can just declare functions right in here, but you can also separate them out and then refer to them. So something like key down, you could then say window.add event listener key down, and then this takes something called an event, but I'm just going to console log. This is a really helpful function. I usually get this to work. Okay. So if you add an event listener on key down and give it a function that takes e, this is an event object that has lots of stuff on it that you can look up. But right now we're just going to use key code. So if we print out what the key code is of a key down event, it'll give us the number that is associated with what key I'm pressing, which is being split up. So A, I think, is what, 97? No, that's lowercase a. 65? Yeah. You can see 65 is A. WASD, 65, 87, 83, 68. Arrow keys are easy to remember because it's 37, 40, going counterclockwise from left. So if you wanted to start using arrow keys for something, you basically would use something like this to figure out what key code there are, and then you can process them based on the key code. Usually what I have to set up for key codes is I would create a list of all the keys so that you can keep track of whether or not they're being held down or not, because the events only give you when they are pressed and when they are released. So if you want to have the information ready of whether a key is being currently pressed, you have to keep track of that yourself. So I'm going to make a key down and a key up function, and I'm going to get the key code as k, and then I'll just say keys of k equals true, and when you go up, it'll be false. So now it's not printing out anything anymore, but if I go into my keys, you'll see like everything's false. But the benefit of this is that now you can go into your update function and do stuff like if keys of 65 this.x equals 0, or something like that. And then that means when I press A, they're going to get schlumped over to the left side. which is similar to how Unity uses stuff like input.getKeyDown. Typically, I would store the controllers you're using in an object for like configuration, so that instead of just putting the key codes in here, you can instead say controls is this object and write is 65. It's basically like an enum, but depending on how you set it up, you can actually do it so that it can take multiple values. And then you can say something like controls.write. Except that's wrong because write is D, which is 68. I don't remember which one of these is which. So it comes first alphabetically. S, right? So this is wrong. No, is it? Up is 87? Yeah. So we can take this out entirely. And then we can just say this.x plus equals keys controls.write. Oh wait, that's not gonna work. Frick. There's different ways to do this. The easiest way that people are familiar with probably is to just say if your key is down on the right, add to the x, right? And then you can just copy this and be like, well, if it's on the left, you can subtract from it. And then you'll have stuff that moves around. There's a lot of input lag between the keyboard and this monitor. What? Stop. Another thing you can do instead is you can keep track of like the difference in your input, like input x, and say that it's equal to keys control.right minus keys control.left. Because these are booleans, but we're basically turning them into integer values so that if one of them, if right is true, it'll be positive. If left is true, it'll be -1. If they're both true, it'll be 0, and if they're both false, it'll be 0. So pushing on both of them does nothing like it should. But the main issue with this is that if I actually use this, you'll see pretty clearly that it'll break. And I get an error. And the reason for that is that this value doesn't exist until you assign it when this happens, because this is blank. So a way to fix that is to just say, fill it with zeros. And there's like 255 ASCII keys, so just for completeness sake, just fill it with zeros. And there's still an error because I fucked something else up. 7. Oh, I spelled controls wrong. But yeah, you don't have to do it this way if you prefer just doing the if statement way. Remember that down is positive and up is negative. So this would be an update function for something like your main character, or your controllable character. I'm controlling all of the entities at once because I didn't want to make another class. But you can see why you would pretty easily just be able to do that. Class player extends entity, and then you just have to, because you're extending the entity, you still get everything that's the same. You just can change the update function. And then I can take this out. Just do this. And then in order for this to actually mean something, we'd have to create a player, because right now there's not one. So basically when we instantiate everything, we can also push a player into the entities list. But we only want one player. And we just put it 0, 0. So now you can move around while other stuff's doing things. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going through a lot of stuff really fast because I'm crazy. Oh, you're doing that on the key down function. That's why you create these lists. So you don't want to actually, in the key down function, like add values here because stuff like that will happen. That's why instead I'm keeping track of a variable of keys. And then on the update function of the object is when I'm actually using the values.
I enjoyed 4 because when I played it before, as soon as 5 came out, I started playing 5. I never played 4. Yeah, because 4 went more simple system. But it didn't have
So this sort of key setup is a pretty common thing that I'll set up. Key down, key up, key down, key up. The functions themselves are pretty small, but it's an important thing you have to do to get the keys to work. Might make you appreciate Unity's input manager because you don't have to do that yourself. But you can also do cool things like actually put code inside of key down and key up to do stuff like what Duncan was trying to do. And it means if you didn't want to set up all these update and draw loops, you can actually make games that just use event systems and then redraw by themselves and not have a loop. Like say that you don't want to update the screen until the user presses a button because it's like a roguelike or something that doesn't have any animation. But animations are more fun. Which is why I'm setting up all this crap. I'm going to start setting up mouse move handling. Mouse moving is kind of complicated actually. I think I'm just going to do a simplified version. I think we have access to client X and client Y. So if I wanted to say like mouse X, to just keep track of the mouse cursor position. This should let me do that. And then we can test this by maybe saying, oh, that's not a real thing. So this works well enough if your canvas is set up properly, but if you end up stretching the canvas or moving it into the center, you have to do more things to actually make sure that your mouse position is correct. Because I think this will give it the cursor position from a specific point on the web browser. And if you want it to be a specific point in the canvas itself, you have to like get the bounding rect and then subtract it. But once you have the mouse position, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff.
Right. Well, but you're not hiding in between.
Because you could say, well, you can start using the mouse as a parameter in your functions. Yeah, but that's not really helpful. What we'd want to do is use the mouse to, like, say, shoot something. Alright, so what does everybody make? Do you guys want me to just go through house and show you how it works?
That's what I think I have to do.
Yeah.
Looking through house.
Yeah. I was looking at the house, I was really good.
I think that was what we were going for when they
Oh, I can open it on GitHub, I think. Question mark.
So that we can have the best possible comments to use whatever it's in. We're going to use the comment system and we're going to change the way it works with our content. Yeah. That's technically viable. That's only the course is so bad, but then there's that course.
Hi.
What the? What is going on? Oh, I see.
Which, but I have a problem with that. I think those players don't want to. That's an easy way to learn something easier for the local. Like that's, I feel like that's what every local trainer
What?
does. When they start playing, they play the simplest way, the easiest way. Right. And then they'll learn like, oh, I can do the other stuff.
What is going on?
Open folder.
If they're really meant for role playing, sure. But yes. But that doesn't mean you don't call other people with it.
I think it was because it's in the zip. I don't think that it's
Oh yeah, you have to unzip it first.
Why is it?
Like that's like.
It lets me open it without unzipping it. That's really weird.
You can't always go do
Why doesn't it automatically unzip it?
I want someone to play this
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the first 5 minutes, and that's how they're gonna play it for the rest of their life.
There we go.
Well, actually, that's elegance.
Was everybody able to get their? Does anybody have any questions with the code that they've been writing?
Things that you can do that you haven't seen before. Because those shouldn't be new things that you learn because you learn new rules. There should be new things you learn because you learn how to use their rules.
I just set it up with the. It's just a JSON object basically.
Yeah. And that's like learning the spell between first rank and middle rank, which is important. Right. In a lot of cases. Or not in a lot of cases, but in a few cases where you do something like cool together.
Actually, well, do you guys want to try to like make what you've already made into a game? Because I feel like it's not really doing anything, and you can pretty easily. What are some ways we could turn this into a game? Using what you already have. You probably want to choose like collisions. You could do like if you click on boxes, or you could do like you are this thing and you're avoiding other things. And if you touch something, you die and you restart and stuff spawns. Oh, it's spawning. Okay, I'm gonna jump into house just to show how some of this stuff can happen. House is really, really terribly coded because it was for a game jam. I haven't actually looked at it in a while. The mouse is because you have to subtract the position of the canvas element and then divide by its size if it's being resized, which house does resize itself. Setup, draw, start, where it set all the variables.
Oh, you're just gonna go like champion?
You can see this is touch stuff. Resizing the canvas.
Is it still fun? Is it still funny?
This is an interesting thing. Actually, can I?
I mean, it depends on how you like to play it start off.
Let's open it.
You get other stuff too. You can multi-class. You can
Spec.
if you're like magic passes.
Key.
Fair test.
What the fuck?
I mean,
Give me my console.
I'm playing crawlers really quickly, but now I'm never gonna play that deck. Like I will never play that deck anymore. I will never play the 800 deck ever again. Really?
Oh yeah, this is how you draw a triangle. You have to use move 2 and line 2, and then I basically made a fill triangle that does the triangle path and then fills it. And it specifies this is the left corner and then base and then height, and you can give it a negative height and it'll just go down. So that's how it creates the house effect, is that it's one rectangle here, the triangle here, and then these 2 black rectangles on top. So look into drawing stuff. This is, actually it's not that much code, but this is the complicated answer to how do you make things rotate. You have to save and restore the canvas so that you can then translate it, which basically says, take all things I'm doing after this point to be translated based on this point, so that you could do something like draw a rectangle at 0, 0, but it'll actually be drawn wherever you translate it to. And the reason why you have to translate is because rotate will always translate based on rotate based on whatever your translate position is. So first you translate it to whatever position of the object is, then you rotate it, then you translate it the offset of the pivot position, which in this case is the center, and then you actually draw the shape, which will then call whatever your draw shape function does, which in this case draws a house. Most of the functionality is going to be in this mover, which is where in the update, see if I can find it, you'll see it starts moving around based on a velocity, and that the velocity is being modified by, actually this is fake, don't look at this. This is the actual thing. Oh god, it's so complicated. input X, input Y, get axes. Wow, there's so much more things in here than I realized when I'm having to explain it to people that don't know anything. But starting from the beginning, when we hit start, it adds this house button, which is this thing. And the house button is a class. You can look at how it works. Basically, it just says it's extending a clickable object, which a clickable handles, hey, on my update, if the mouse is down. Oh, no, wait, no. This is if I get clicked on, I guess. Contains is my cursor position inside of the bounds of this button. So if you're inside of the bounds of the button, why is this called mouse D? This is just if it's on top of it, whatever. Oh, moused, as in moused over. That's what that means. Frick. So if you moused over the house, it'll increase its scale so that it like slightly bulges like that. And then scale is being handled by the thing. It's literally called thing. I'm sorry. Where it'll then scale based on the scale value. And then once you click on it, it calls clicked, which doesn't do anything inside of clickable because you have to extend it first. So then the house button extends it, and it says, once you get clicked, add a mover and then delete me. Which is why it then gets replaced with this other mouse. Okay, this is an interesting thing too. Once you're dealing with entity lists, you want to know how to spawn things and how to delete them. To edit the way that you set yours up to start deleting things, this is going to take too long. Okay. You want to go into your update function, and instead of, where is it? Oh my god, why does Straw have so much stuff in it? Okay. You'll see that my update function is like way more complicated than it probably needs to be, but also more complicated than what you've been writing. Instead of the for each functions, you have to use a for loop because you want to delete things from the list as we're iterating through it. You can't do that using the for each function. So instead, you do the classic for loop, I equals 0 to the length, and then you store the entity, and then you do the update here. But the difference is that if it has the should delete tag on it, you basically delete. This is how you delete something from an array in JavaScript. You splice it. Delete something at that index, and then you have to subtract from the index because when it's going to add 1 automatically at the end of the for loop, you don't want it to skip a value because it's deleted something, so everything's been pushed in backwards. So you have to add all of this code if you want to get stuff to start deleting. And then obviously if you want to spawn stuff in, you can just add push to the entity list. But if you set up your entity list so that they automatically delete things on should delete, that means that you can then handle the should delete in the update functions of the entities themselves, so that things like bullets can say set the should delete tag after a certain amount of time so that they automatically delete themselves. So what questions do you have about the house since you've already looked through it? Like what's something that you would want to learn how to do, as an example?
So what exactly happens or at the end when you spawn the boss? Because I see that you have like things that are equal to negative 1. So when I'm trying to trigger something when the boss is 0 out, like if I'm trying to make another entity spawn when you kill the boss, it won't let you do that. So what exactly is happening when you spawn the boss?
When you spawn it or when it dies?
When it spawns.
You're trying to spawn something when it dies, or?
Yeah.
Well, if the issue is trying to spawn something when the boss dies, there's something happening when the boss dies that triggers like a you won the game effect. And so if you're trying to circumnavigate that, I think it's using some like really shitty code. Let's see, boss. I think it's an update, right? Boss dot. Nope. Let's see. Boss doesn't have a die function. God, it's so much longer than it should be. Oh, you're looking for where it.
If spawn count equals negative or is equal to negative.
Yeah. So it's setting the spawn count to -1 as soon as the boss spawns. It's basically saying I'm trying to use spawn count as a state check, which I shouldn't be doing. This isn't really what this actually represents. So that once the boss has been spawned and all of the enemies are dead, then you win. And then when win is true, something else happens. So spawn count, when does spawn count get set to -1? And this is why you should have consistent style.
After the boss gets pushed.
Yeah. So if you wanted it to, once you beat the boss, have something else happen, you can change the part that says that you win and say instead go to the next level or something like that, right? So instead of winning, you can say, like, go to next level here. Is that what you're asking? Hopefully that would work. But if you're asking why this is like this, you shouldn't do it like this. It's just bad. If I wanted to fix it, what I really should do is keep track of the waves as some sort of object structure. So, like, for example, waves should be a list of objects, and then each object should have like enemy type, and then the first one would be like, I think it's just enemy, and then the number of enemies, which I don't know how many. There's supposed to be some number. I can find it somewhere. And then you want like the amount of time between each spawn, so like spawn rate, like something, and then have the next one be whatever enemy blah blah blah. But then what you should do is when you process enemy spawns, it should go through some sort of wave process, where instead of just calling the spawn enemy function, which the spawn enemy function, can't even find it, goes through this like weird case statement thing. Basically, this is saying if the boss has been spawned, don't spawn any more enemies. Otherwise, it's using this to figure out which wave it's in. But instead, what you could do is basically, you'd want to say, let's see. So it looks like it spawns 30 enemies, and then 10 big enemies, and then makes you wait for a while, and then spawns the boss. So you could instead say wave equals waves, and then like some wave count that you'd have to define, and then like you'd want to do like spawn count. This is where the spawn count should actually be set as 1 or added as every time it spawns something. And you would do like entities dot push new wave dot enemy type. You can actually do this. And what you'd want to do is then test like if spawn count is greater than or equal to probably wave count, wave dot count. What did I call it? Where is it? I should move this to over here just so I can see it. Then you'd want to basically like set spawn count to 0 and then increase the wave count. Actually, there's a better way of doing this. But the point of this is that you should probably try to structure your data like this so that you can more easily modify it. And it's being modified this way, which is really weird. And then you'd have to go to like start to figure out what the initial spawn time is, 50, which is really annoying. See, when I'm going through this trying to figure out how stuff works, I'm going into a lot of problems with trying to find where all the data is because it's kind of spread all over the place. So if you want to structure it so that all the data should be where it is necessary, where it's around things that are related to each other. Like right now, if I wanted to change the way these waves work, this less than 30 thing is being used more than once. I think, or maybe it isn't. Actually, I guess it is only used here. Well, maybe this is fine. But you could do the same thing for levels and create a level structure. But yeah, if I wanted to fix this, this is what I would probably do. And then you'd have to test if this stuff works, which is going to be kind of complicated. But you were asking what happened when the boss spawns?
Yeah, I think I got it from somewhere in the explanation.
Well, all that happens when the boss spawns is it just tells it to stop spawning other enemies by setting this equal to -1, because it does a check here. Which again is really dumb. You shouldn't do it like that. But yeah, there's the only other change that happens is once you beat the boss, which just sets this win thing to true, and then once win is true, wow, that's really annoying. Yeah, once win is true, you can't shoot anymore, which the reason why is because I'm trying to test if the entity list is empty so that you can see when all the loot has been picked up.
Hey Brian,
Yeah.
how are you doing?
Okay.
Yeah, because our
That was
strike.
5.
Yeah,
Okay.
just like now.
Okay. Yeah. So we're out of time, and Art Strike has to meet. But if you guys want to stick around and talk to me about it, I can show you one